Welcome to the Bladtcast, joined today by Ron Young, who is the lead vocalist for the band Little Caesar, and he has a great new book called Judge This Book by Its Cover. Ron, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, first and foremost, I will let you know that yesterday, when I was, I knew I was going to talk to you today, and I had not done my homework. I had not read the book, and I'm like, well, I'll read 50, 100 pages, and I'll at least have a sense for what's going on. And it grabbed me right away. And 287 pages later, I had read the entire book. So,
Nice. Nice.
so judge this book by its cover is a great read, and it's a very conversational sort of style by you. And I was just really taken aback by your story and your honesty. One of the comments in the notes that was sent to me is that it was the most honest book about the music industry that someone had ever read, and I was like, yeah,
That's great.
it's very honest, and you have a lot to be honest about about how it went, and it's not the
And
stories that
here's the other interesting thing. When you get to a point in your life that you don't have to put on airs and you don't worry about retributions. You don't worry. You know what I mean? It's like,
sure.
what are they going to do? Come take my dog? It's like, what's left? So
Yeah, no, exactly, and we'll get into well, I would say we'd get into all of it, but we'll get into as much as we can. But reading about you running afoul of David Geffen, it tracks with in an earlier life, just running things around L.A. I had like a package to drop off at his house from someone who was like a really good friend of his, and the way that the people who work for him wouldn't even let me pull into his driveway without pouncing on my car tells me
yeah,
what I need to know about
yeah,
David Geffen. But
yes.
let's sort of try and approach this chronologically, because that's essentially what you do with the book. And you talk a lot about a really rough upbringing, and I think you're very honest about the fact that your mother was an alcoholic and depressed, and that your siblings were older and they had left home, and I think that I think a lot of people can read that and understand that there's a lot of pain in your life. And then the interesting thing is that because of where you grew up in Queens, you chose even more pain in your life, and you decided to become a fan of the New York Mets. And
Yes.
I go there because
Yes.
what I also grew
Yeah.
up with that. But it was one of my favorite stories in there. Talk a little bit about how you had a couple of things happen when you were really young that it didn't necessarily give you the bug for performing, but you're like, oh, I kind of like when people are paying attention to me in a good way. There were a couple of things. You can certainly start with the Mets game, which was just reading about that was very exciting to me.
Yeah, well, it's 1966. Shea Stadium was literally just down the road from where I was living. So, it was, a big part of the social thing to do is just, go grab some hot dogs and watch the Mets in the basement of the National League, you know, play poorly
Yeah.
to like a one-tenth filled stadium. Um, and they were trying out this promotion thing where it's called Banner Day, where they let all the fans come down on the field and parade around with banners, and they had a competition. Well, my brother got wanted to go to this, and my mom wrangled him into, well, if you're going to go, you got to take your younger brother. So he couldn't figure out any way to incorporate me into his idea of some kind of banner thing. So he decided that him and another 6-year old buddy of mine were going to have their own little thing. And so at the time, there was this big, smoking campaign for Tarryton cigarettes called, Tarryton smokers would rather fight than switch. And they showed people smoking and they had a black eye. And so they decided to dress me and my buddy up in full size adult Met uniforms and the banner said that we'd rather shrink than switch. And so, thought it was cute. And so he brings us down to the field with his banner and our banner. He goes, okay, you guys hold this and you walk around the field, and I'll meet you back here in 45 minutes or whenever this thing is over. And so we start parading around. The next thing you know, if anybody remembers old school Mets, stars, it was Jerry Grody and there was Ron Swoboda and Tom Seaver. Well, they're all hanging out in the dugout waiting for this silly thing to end. And they see us and they grab us and pull us in the dugout. Make a long story short, we won the grand prize. And really pissed my brother off, because we were an afterthought to this thing. And, nowadays because I still think they do it. Nowadays, you get like a trip to Hawaii or a car. Well, back in 1966, when they were in the basement, it was a black and white Admiral television and a case of canned tuna. That was the grand prize. So they gave us this thing, and we got all this attention. So here I am, 6 years old, getting all this attention. And there was a show in New York that wound up getting syndicated in a lot of other places called Wonderama back then. And it was a kid's show on the weekends. And so somebody read about us and they invited us to be the stars on Wonderama. And so we go down and we're on a TV show in New York. And we got to meet one of the other guests on the show was Burt Ward, who played Robin in Batman. So got to meet Burt Ward, and our names are in the TV guide. And then right around the same time, there was this big, where I lived was this big giant apartment complex. And they had this big Olympic-sized pool, and we used to hang out there in the summers. Well, at the time, the mayor was this guy, John Lindsay. And so to go press the flesh and meet his constituents, he came down to this giant pool and grabbed me and stuck me on his lap. And the next thing I know, there's a picture of me and the mayor on the New York Post on the front page. And shortly after that, I'm in kindergarten, and the TV show Candid Camera came down to shoot. They wanted to do some stuff with kids, because kids do the darndest things and say the darndest things. And next thing I know, I'm on, a national TV show with ice cream cones trying to open up a door. So all of this goes on in my life. Oh, and then the final thing was at the same pool, they used to have live bands play. And so here I am, 6 years old, and they had this cover band. And, I saw all the attention that people were giving these guys in the band. And I went up and said, I want to sing a song with you guys. And they thought it was really funny that a 6-year-old saying, and they were like, so what song do you know? And I was like, My Baby Does the Hanky Panky. So when a 6-year-old singing, my baby does the hanky, and coming out of the mouth of a 6-year-old, they thought was absolutely hysterical. And so did the hundreds of people down at this pool. So all of this happens in like a 6-month period of my life. And I'm like, I really like this, trying to get up and get attention, thing. And it definitely started me down the path, of wanting to be in the public eye, just as dangerous as heroin was later in my life, but nonetheless,
Right. Just as addictive, it's,
totally.
I remember, somebody, it was, comedian Norm Macdonald once talked about gambling. It's like it's the only disease you can have where you might end up with a bunch of money. So
Yes.
all of these things are very addictive in their own way. But show business would be
Yes.
another one of those. It's
Totally.
it can be infectious in the way that you're getting a lot of attention and also a lot of money. So I touched on it briefly, and there's what we're talking about, all these great moments, all this great attention, but just take a moment and sort of summarize how your home life was kind of the opposite of that. In the book, I made sure I wrote it out exactly the way you did. A direct quote. You say, "My mother was an alcoholic, period, a crazy fucking bitch." So
Yes.
those are your words about your mom.
Yes.
But
Yes.
and from having read the book, I'm like, okay, yeah, I think he earned those two sentences by his explanation.
Yeah, no doubt. And this is the thing, when you're a kid, you have nothing to compare your life to. Your life is just your life when you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And it's not until you start getting older that you realize there's something not quite right and normal about your home life. And so for years, you just go on thinking that moms just guzzle vodka and sing along to Ray Charles music. That's just what moms do. You know, make you cook your own dinner at 9 years old. So
Yeah.
it was chaotic to say the least. And as you pointed out, my brother and sister, who were like 9 and 10 years older than me, out of self-preservation, they bailed out really early. They pulled the ripcord and got the hell out of that situation, and it kind of left me, there, the last man standing, so to speak. And it's not till later in life when these things formulate your own behaviors and your own coping skills, so on and so forth, that you start to see the actual dysfunction. But at the time, it's just your reality.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense that you would be in a rush to also get out of that situation yourself. But you did touch on the one thing, that your mom singing along to Ray Charles. It does seem that you did grow up around music, and one of the things you put in the book when you were talking about it was what a huge part of our culture music was. And in a lot of ways, it isn't in the same way because of the fact that it's so readily available. You didn't say this, but as I was reading it, I was thinking about the fact that for all the people who take the time and they want to get their music on vinyl and sit down and make an event of listening to it, most people have a device just like I do, a little cell phone, and they stream what they listen to, and they never buy anything. And I love album artwork. I love liner notes. If it comes with lyrics, I'm still in heaven. But I understand that it's not as big a deal. But growing up, it seems like it was really one of only a few things that would be in your life that would have been enjoyable, was sitting down and listening to music.
Yeah, music is really. I think people have gotten spoiled. Like you say, it's sort of like it's like when I was a kid reading the cereal box. I was the same way. You wanted to read the liner notes. You wanted to look for all those little things. But decades ago, without all the technology that we have now, you've got, you had four channels on a TV, you had theaters, and you had radio. And that was everybody's source of escape, entertainment, um, how they experience culture. When I was 11, 12 years old, as I start getting into puberty and you start having all these sexual feelings and everything, I turned to Robert Plant to tell me about my feelings. That was where I used to go to get a release for all of these feelings. And music sonically provided this escape in my crazy environment, and all the different types of music that was available. I mean, this at this point, it's we're talking late 60s into the late 70s, which to me, as old men always say, "Oh, that was the best period of music."
Sure.
But it really was. You had everything from the Beatles to Led Zeppelin to Black Sabbath to Bad Company to there was a million. The Band, Allman Brothers, Grateful Dead. I mean, there was a million, and then all the R&B music, all the Motown and the blues music, and there was such a huge variety of music. And depending on what you wanted to feel, you would drop that piece of vinyl down, or you would drop that cassette into the player in the later years, and it would take you somewhere. And now we're spoiled that we can just pick up our phone or pick up our laptop and but when I'm 16 and I'm trying to figure out what sex is, and Robert Plant's telling me, well, I'm gonna squeeze that lemon till the juice runs down my leg.
Yeah, exactly.
If you type in "squeeze that lemon till the juice runs down my leg" into Pornhub, you're gonna get some really freaky visuals. You know,
And yeah,
we didn't
and don't
have. We didn't,
don't be surprised at how many views that video already has.
oh, I know. It's like, wow, there's a lot of people into lemons and insertions. It's
Yeah.
like that must sting. But when you're when I was a kid back then, that music was the way to find out about these things. And I think so many other things now occupy people's consciousness that it's diminished the power of music. And I think it the fact that like you're saying, all of these revenue streams have dried up in music. People don't
Yeah.
buy hard copies of music anymore. Now the music business is put out a piece of music so that you get enough attention so that you can sell the data from your YouTube videos. It's not about the record anymore. It's, can you put out a piece of music that attracts enough eyeballs so that you can sell ads to them on YouTube, or sponsorships through your tweets, or but it's not about, the revenue doesn't come from the music anymore. It comes from the attention that the music brings you. It's the
Right. And
selling of data.
for so many acts, obviously the focus, it's sort of the reverse of the period you're talking about, where you used to tour to let people know you had a new album out. Now the album is also, for all the things you said, it's an excuse to go on a show and promote the fact that you have these live dates. But the real money doesn't come from the performance of the concert. It comes from the fact that you get 30 seconds to take a picture with the band beforehand, and maybe they'll sign one thing for $1,000. And for
Yep.
bands who can do it and people who want to pay it, it's like, I'm not even disparaging it, but it's like, I think that bands on a smaller level, it can be like, well, for $100 you get a Q&A and you can come to sound check. I can see that. I've done that myself. But
Yep.
the business model is less about the actual music, the recording of it, the playing of it, the performing of it. I agree that it's all this ancillary stuff, because you still have people with trying to get a piece of the pie. It's just a different pie than there used to be, I guess.
Totally different. It's like, well, can we let's finish the pie so that we can clean out the tin and sign it and sell it backstage. So
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, before we get to your arrival in the music industry, we were talking a moment ago about how focused you were on getting out of your house and the fact that you go to college. And I loved reading about how you went to college with the best of intentions, but then I think it was your friend's girlfriend was like the heiress to the company that made Quaaludes. So
Mhm.
explain how suddenly opportunity really knocked in a way that getting good grades didn't seem like the most necessary revenue stream. Speaking of which,
Well, when you turn 18 years old and you live in a household with an alcoholic, the opportunity that college presents itself is not about academics, it's about freedom. So I got the hell out of and went to college and used the fact that academics was came pretty easy to me to get into a good, college. And when I got out to college, they happened to stick me on one of the party dorm floors, which I look at as fate more than I looked at as anything else. But you had a choice to either find a balance between your extracurricular and your curricular activities, and I just went full tilt for the. You mean I can listen to the music as loud as I want, be as hammered as I want. Right upstairs is a whole floor of women my age, and so the academia part instantly went out the window. And we immediately just focused in on the fun that all the freedom had allowed. And I should have known then that I had a propensity to overindulge. And then, yeah, when opportunity presented itself for fortunately a short period of time, where we basically had a bowl of Quaaludes. Now, for people that might be a little bit younger, Quaaludes is like taking every great euphoric thing that's in every great drug ever invented and put into one. It made you horny. It made you happy. It's like a little bit of ecstasy mixed with a little. It was. They had to get rid of it really fast, and so anyway, that was very much. It was very prevalent at that point of my life, and we really enjoyed the indulgence of it, and it got me into a lot of trouble. But it also got me to decide. Well, I'll boil it down. Some people, you get a 4.0, which is a perfect grade point average. People that do really bad in school get a 1.0 grade point average. My last semester, I had a 0.10 grade point average. I think this you couldn't get a 0. So that's when it was time to leave college and move into New York City and just chase music.
Yeah, and I think that that was sort of an interesting step, obviously, because you're in New York City at that time period, and just I think it's the late '70s, early '80s. It's that time period where there's just so much music and so many different kinds of music, and
yeah.
You weren't even necessarily I'm going to be in a band right away, but you start to just kind of hang around so many different people and just the venues, and you start to get a feel for it. So I thought it was interesting that the first band you ended up in was called Kingpin, and it was a rockabilly sort of a band. And I think it seems like you had, let's say, middling success there, but I did love the story you told about getting the opportunity to open for someone you'd never heard of, Stevie Ray Vaughan. And so I wanted you to kind of take a moment and explain watching him, but then also how cool of a guy he was after the show.
Yeah, the quick backstory on that was I was in this rockabilly band. We were just in a van and we were driving really from city to city. Anybody that would book us, we would drive there and play. So we did a show in Ohio where I met, there was a guitar player in a band called the Big Boys, Chris Gates, who winds up playing in Junkyard, who we're about to go out and do a bunch of shows. That's how far back I go with Chris. Chris gets us these shows down in Texas, where he's from, and we show up and we play at this place called Fitzgerald's in Houston, which was a great venue. I think it's probably still there. And, we finish our set and the place is packed, and this next band gets up, and it's Stevie Ray Vaughan. And we're standing on the side of the stage, and from the first note, we're like, what the fuck is this? Oh my God. This man is from another planet. And just completely blown away. And at how stupid we were. I thought it was Stevie Ray Vaughan, Raveon. I thought, what kind of a Texas Yahoo name is Rave On, And It was Ray Vaughan, So we're completely stupefied by his playing. And we go back to this shitty little motel. It turns out it's the same motel that he's staying at. And there's a knock on the door. We're all crammed into one hotel, sharing beds, and it's his tour manager saying Stevie wants to hang out with you guys and come to his room. So we go over to his room, and he offers us a bunch of Jack Daniels, and he's just being cordial as hell, being really complimentary about our music. And then he throws this envelope on the bed and says, listen, I know you only got like $200 and you're out living in a van. That's not enough money. So out of his own pocket, he threw us a few $100, which who does that, except someone that's just incredibly genuinely just just a good goddamn person, you know? And we did a few shows with him. And then funny enough, we came back to New York and we did a show opening up for his brother in Fabulous Thunderbirds. And we get ready. It was a place called the Lone Star Cafe. So we're getting ready to go, you know, it was 2 shows a night. So we're getting ready to go on stage and the dressing room door won't open. And it's because Jimmy Vaughn is holding the door and he refused to let us go out on stage until we started drinking with him, because he had mentioned to his brother Stevie that we were opening, and he was like, Stevie says you guys like to drink a bit, so let's have some cocktails. And he got us completely wasted. So just a super nice family, and what a treat it was to. This is before Stevie Ray was signed. You know, he just about to start recording with David Bowie and just getting ready to go in to do his solo record. So it was just such a great moment in musical history to be able to witness.
Yeah, and for somebody that's such a, you know, unique, brilliant, singular talent, you know, kind of like a
Oh
once in
my
a lifetime
God.
guy,
Yeah.
to
Once in a
get to
lifetime.
see them in that setting has got to be fantastic. So, you know, if you were making, you know, a fictional story about a musician who starts a band and makes it big and makes good, and then you know you've got the first act of that fictional story would be a very much the first act of Little Caesar. And
Yes.
just, you know, I was familiar with the band. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but I had no idea how all the stars were aligned in a way that, like, yes, of course this band should be huge, but
Oh yeah.
take a moment to talk about the positioning of those stars and how, I guess, I don't know, they got engulfed by a black hole or the sun swallowed up the stars. I'm not quite sure what happened.
Yes. The proverbial, so many celestial bodies cannot exist in one spot without it turning into a black hole.
Exactly.
Well, so yeah, I wound up moving out to Los Angeles and put this band together, mostly because I couldn't be in a glam metal band. I was too rough and tumble, and I sang too. I didn't sing in the pretty sort of pop style that was really being popularized at the time. So we put this band together, and the first show that we do happens. Jimmy Iovine's assistant happens to be there. And the day after our first show, I get a phone call from Jimmy Iovine. He gets my phone number where I'm working, and I talk to him for 2 hours at the phone at the messenger company that I'm working at. And by the end of that conversation, Jimmy's managing the band. And, you know, Jimmy winds up getting a bidding war around the band. You know, once Jimmy is involved, all these labels are throwing checks at you. So we wind up signing with Geffen to the largest record deal ever signed to a new band in the history of the music business at the time. So we start working with the infamous John Kalodner of AC/DC, Aerosmith, you know, fame.
Yeah,
And
the guy who, you know, speaking of liner notes, he would usually be listed as John Kalodner space John Kalodner. Like
every time,
his
twice
role
his
was
name.
being John Kalodner. Yeah.
That's his name twice.
Yeah.
And that's the ego that the man has. And he walked around in a white linen suit with long blonde hair and John Lennon glasses like he was some guru, you know. And so we have Jimmy Iovine, we've got John Kalodner. John Kalodner brings Bob Rock aboard to produce the record. Now, this is before Bob is a famous producer. He, at this point, is a really successful engineer doing Aerosmith, and he just finished off the Cult record. So we've got, you know, Bob Rock of Metallica fame, you know, John Kalodner of Aerosmith, AC/DC fame, Jimmy Iovine of just, you know, Tom Petty, Fleetwood Mac, you know, turns into a billionaire literally when he sells beats. So we've got these 3 people and a major label all involved. And as meteoric and as powerful as the ascent of the band was, literally within a 5-week window, it completely imploded. and everything that could possibly go wrong in a 5-week window, to the point where all of these very famous people who have a legacy to protect now want to disassociate themselves as quickly as they did associate themselves with your rising star. As soon as things out of their control went wrong, they all were jumping off the spaceship as quickly as they could and left us in the wake. And there was really not a damn thing we could do at that point.
Well, one of the things you talk about is the record itself, the debut Little Caesar album, and you were talking about Bob Rock producing it, and in the book you talk about how he left for a little while to go do another record, which we then find out was Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood. So then he comes back, and then he's kind of got all this juice. And do you feel that because of that, people were less likely to intervene? The fact that you were all up in Vancouver, nobody wanted to get on a plane. So he was really left to his own devices. It seemed like you were very vocal about wanting the record to sound different, but he's like, well, I'm Bob Rock, so we're going to do it this way.
Yeah, it was, we started when we first met with Bob, and he was just really a phenomenally successful engineer. And we were like, well, we want you to produce, and we want to produce a record that's sort of like a 70s throwback, very organic, very honest, leaving all the personality in the performances to be heard, and get away from this overproduced style of hair metal that was prevalent for 10 years. And he loved that concept. So we started making the record, and that's exactly what we did. And then right in the middle of that record, the record Dr. Feelgood that he had produced for Motley Crue got released. And all of a sudden it went from, Bob making a Little Caesar record to Little Caesar making a Bob Rock style record. And like you said, we're up in Vancouver. Nobody's going to tell Bob Rock, who's now the world, that he should change his approach to this new band that nobody's heard of. And John Calabre's not going to go against him. And Jimmy Iovine at this point is, like, well, let's wait and listen to what the mixes sound like. But at this point, it was so far gone that it was a freight train that we couldn't change the course of.
Right. And during that window, Little Caesar gets sent out to go on tour with Kiss. And a lot of your story and in the book is a lot of missed opportunities. And I'm going to share with you and our visual audience. There's two images here, but the one on the left is the one that matters. The second concert that I ever went to,
Middletown,
was Kiss at the Orange County Fairgrounds in Middletown, New York. But in keeping with the theme of missed opportunities, I did miss the first band that day. So you were almost the third band that I ever saw in my life. But my buddy's uncle, he was a little bit of a like the proverbial slacker. His car stopped working halfway there. We had to make some quick fixes from some random neighbors of the highway, and we made it in time for Slaughter. So I actually never got to see your band. But
well, here's one of the other interesting things. You say it says 8 p.m. I'd say half the shows we did with Kiss, it would say show starts at 8 p.m. and Gene Simmons would put us on at 7:45 for 30 minutes. So basically, people would come into the arena and they'd see 15 minutes of the band. And part of the reason for this was Gene was starting to get the reviews from the cities the day or so after the shows, and everybody was talking about this opening band that was totally different than all the hair metal kind of stuff, and how we're this, and Gene didn't like that.
Yeah, no, I think that an opening act getting attention that's what is the beginning of Kiss's career. Bands didn't want to go on after them. Bands would only let them have half the stage. But this era that you were there, the interesting thing is you write about it. You sort of got an understanding of Gene Simmons, and you got to know him a little bit, the good and the bad.
Yes.
But my favorite story in there, and look, I don't want to give away all your stories in the book, but if you could talk about the sound guy in the fire red suit. It's such a
Yes.
funny story.
The magic and the monster that is Gene Simmons all rolled into one. Yeah, when we first started out on the tour, okay, so Kiss at this point, a guy that I wound up becoming buddies with, Gary Corbett, was playing keyboards to double
Sure.
up all of Paul's rhythm good parts and hit samples for all those big giant background vocals. So Kiss was very pioneering in using some of that technology. It was triggered all by keyboard.
And some
Well,
would say that they're pioneering in using a lot more of those than they did at that time. But that's not something that
yes,
you're saying. That's just something I'm saying. It's one of those some would say. But anyway,
some would say yes. So
back to your
anyway,
point about
so
1990. Yeah,
yeah, so Gene Simmons is notoriously vicious on sound men and especially monitor engineers because Gene would say, "I'd like to hear more of, you know, more of the vocal in the mix." What he was saying in the monitors, what he was saying was he wanted to hear more of the keyboard parts. So anyway, so he fired a monitor engineer, and this new guy shows up like the second day we're there. And every day he's walking around like in this same sort of what's like a NASCAR pit crew suit. And we're like, and he's got the same hat on and with the patches and everything on. And we're like, wow, this dude is a NASCAR fan because he's wearing this thing every day. So every day, especially being the new guy, Gene is yelling at him, yelling at him. And every time Gene yells at him, the guy goes like that. And he just holds up his hand for like a couple of minutes and does what he's got to do with his other hand on the board. Anyway, long story short, Gene keeps yelling at this guy. And finally, the guy decides he's had enough. So he gets in a cab and he goes to the airport. And what he did was he put up this cardboard cutout of, he got it from like AutoZone, of this guy in a pit crew suit holding up his hand wearing the exact costume. This guy knew in advance that Gene was probably going to treat him like crap. So he set up this whole thing wearing this whole outfit and put up this cardboard cutout of the guy doing this because the cardboard cutout was doing exactly what he was doing for like 3-4 days.
right.
And he left. And Gene's yelling at this cardboard cutout while it's just like this, you know? And Gene's like, I need this and I need that. And it's like, gone. Well, Gene goes over there to yell at him, sees it's a cardboard cutout. He throws it. He's all angry. And long story short, they send a cab out to the airport to find this guy and bring him back. And they kissed and made up. And then the guy didn't wear the suit for the rest of the tour.
Well, the interesting thing is that from that night that I saw Kiss, that was the first time I saw them. The second headliner that I ever saw in June 17th, 1990. I do remember Gene basically pointing at his ears a lot. You could tell he was really upset with his sound person. So I'm reading this and it just brings it back. You're not talking about that day probably, but I was just like, oh yeah, he really had a big problem with whoever was doing
sound. No, he was notoriously bad on on monitor engineers. Yeah.
But you did had some interesting stories, some good stuff about getting to know Gene. One of them, I guess you guys ended up, jamming. You guys were I think in Poughkeepsie, and it was like an off night. And so you guys ended up basically hanging out in a bar with Gene, right?
Yeah. The arena that we were playing at, it was like this complex, and the hotel was right next to the arena. And there was some, like they are now, these other bars, like a sports bar type thing. Well, it was an off night. We got there early, and so we went over to this little bar to just have some beers, and there's like this stage set up with just some equipment on it. And the next thing you know, Gene floats into the bar, which is really uncommon for Gene. He didn't do it, but he must have been bored in the hotel. And Gene just out of nowhere goes, "You guys want to jump up and start jamming?" And we're like, "Of course." And all of a sudden, like I said, the magic and the monster that is Gene Simmons, the legend. He is a huge fan of music, and he has an incredible vocabulary. of music and knows so many great songs because he's a huge fan. Motown, the Beatles. So he's just calling out songs and we're just jamming there for hours. And he just had this huge grin on his face for the whole night. And you could just see how much he loves music, and it was just such a treat because it was so easygoing and it had nothing to do with business or spectacle or merchandise or legend or any of that. It was just a bunch of guys that just loved music taking over this little bar with like 25 people in it. And it was just such a treat.
Yeah. A few years later, I would be going to college in Poughkeepsie, New York. I went to Marist College in Poughkeepsie. And the fact that you guys couldn't find anything to do that night does not surprise me. So,
Yeah.
And I've been to a wedding at that hotel that's connected to the venue. So before we move on from Gene and Kiss, I have to ask you the same thing so I've talked to Mark Slaughter a number of times from the band Slaughter, and I always get him to do a Gene Simmons impersonation. Obviously, he was on that tour as well. So many people have one. Do you have a Gene impression, or is that not in your toolkit?
It's not in my toolkit. It really isn't. I am sure, especially because Mark was out for a lot longer with Gene. So no, I don't have an impression. It's especially because he can be so Gene pontificating all the time. So that's about as good as I can get.
Yeah, and Mark's basically is the fact, it would be Gene saying, I don't want to talk badly about Vinny, who, he had worked with Vinnie Vincent on the Vinnie Vincent Vinny
Vincent,
and then Gene would
talk badly.
And then Gene would spend an hour talking badly about Vinnie Vincent. So,
yes, exactly.
Which, look, there's no shortage of people who can talk badly about Vinnie Vincent. But to circle back to your career, there are probably also some people that you can talk badly about. And I think, look, there are times where you read stories or you hear interviews about bands who it just doesn't quite happen. I've never heard anything like what happened to you, that right as the video for Chain of Fools gets into heavy rotation at MTV, people can't buy the CDs or cassettes.
Right.
Talk about how that happened. And I've literally never heard anything like that. Now, obviously, you could get it on your phone and you'd be able to stream it and you'd be able to, get it on iTunes. But in 1990, that's not what's going to happen. So talk about what happened.
This is pre-internet days. Everything has to do with records in stores. So literally, while we were out with Kiss, within a 3-week window, this is what happened. We're out on tour with Kiss. First of all, Gene is trying to get us off the tour because since we replaced Winger, once Winger was ready to come back out, Gene needed to bring them back to increase ticket sales. So we have Gene fighting to get us off the tour. We find out, and I get these phone calls while I'm in a Motel 6 on tour with Kiss, that the record label was just sold. David Geffen just sold the label to this Japanese conglomerate. And our records, which were in Warner Brothers warehouses, now need to be shipped over to BMG warehouses. So in that lull of a few weeks, we're on MTV in heavy rotation, and you can't get our records in the stores because there's no warehouse that anybody can figure out where they are. So that's happening. At the same period of time, the label manager that's in charge of the whole marketing plan at DGC Records gets fired for masturbating on his secretary. So literally there's no one running the show. So, and then the final nail in the coffin was we get a phone call from David Geffen saying that you need to fire your manager, Jimmy Iovine, because Jimmy is starting up a company called Interscope Records. And so in the state of California, legally, you cannot be a record distributor and a manager by law. So what had happened was Jimmy Iovine decided that he made an announcement. He's starting up Interscope Records. David called him and said, I want you to do the distribution through Geffen. Jimmy told David to go screw off. He didn't want to have anything to do with him. And David got really offended by that, decided to take it out through Little Caesar, as in 10 different areas, but the first thing was going to be, watch this. I'm going to get you to be fired by your band. So this all would happen in a 3-week period. And we're out on tour. We can't do anything to fix it. We don't have a manager that's got any weight at the label because he has to quit or be fired. We don't have anybody managing the label anymore because high on ecstasy and cocaine, he decided to masturbate on his secretary or ejaculate on his secretary. And pretty rock and roll thing to do, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think everybody can have a story about the fact that in a lot of ways, record execs seem to basically stand around with their dick in their hand. But then this one literally did it, and it got him fired.
Good one. Yes.
Yeah. You know, I jotted that down when I was reading.
Yes. Good one. I got to remember that one. Yeah. Well, this is that period of time when, there are legends. I don't mention the gentleman's name because he's changed his life and he's a great guy, always has been a great guy. And like myself, this was his dark period of consumption of, illegal substances.
Sure.
And this was his bottom. It affected my life and my career, but I harbor no ill will toward the man, but it definitely, his life imploded on him. And like a secretary, kind of splashed all over us a bit. And, there was some fallout from it. And this all, like I said, happened in a 3 to 4 week window where our meteoric rise to fame went into the toilet and not to be resurrected.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that, it's that's sort of an interesting turn in the book in the sense that I guess David Geffen sort of takes a dislike to you because you had the audacity to, give one, your honest opinion, and two, call attention to the fact that, basically they were mismanaging your band. So, some bands might be able to recover from this moment and then have a second record come out that's even bigger and, makes the big splash. But it seems like the second record, just all the stars were again now aligned against you because the people who were in your corner originally now really didn't want you to succeed.
Yeah, now they just want you to go away. They want you to quietly go away. And when you get a personal vendetta from, David Geffen was a billionaire at this point.
Yeah.
He sold the label and here's this little band with this tattooed, biker dude that's speaking truth to power. And he decided he would rather snuff me out than help me succeed. And, it's just the rough and tumble world of the music business. And I don't even hold any ill will toward him either. He's protecting his business, so to speak. I happen to be in the crosshairs of that judgment call. But, if I had a huge corporation to protect, I'd want to bury any bad stories about me too.
Yeah. And then you talk about how you learn the hard way what a key man clause is in a contract, because the second album kind of just comes and goes almost right away. And then the plan is great. All right, we're going to be out of this contract and then we can get things started. But then you get held and you talk about how basically the same thing had happened to Don Henley, because he has that huge, I think the album's also called Edge of the Innocents, that huge album at the end of the 80s. And then, as you point out, he doesn't put anything out for 10 years, basically because he didn't want to work for David Geffen. So he would rather not work. And when you're Don Henley and you can go like, great, I'm going to put the Eagles back together, even though I said hell would freeze over. I'll just go and do that. When your fallback job is, the band with the #1 selling greatest hits album of all time, it's a little easier to not put out music.
Yep.
So
your side gig, you got a pretty good side gig. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
your safety net is to, you know, go hang out with Glenn Fry and Joe Walsh.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly. Let's put the band back together. Yeah. Yeah.
So and then, you know, you're very honest about how it was all just too much for you, and then you spend a number of years just smoking heroin every single day, is from what it sounded like.
Oh, many times a day too.
Yeah, sure. Right.
Yeah, yeah. You kind of have to. Yeah, you know what? It spun me into this cycle of self pity and depression, and it's understandable. But my coping skills, especially with my upbringing, was to, when things don't feel good, just get numb. And me and my ignorance, I always thought, because my drug of choice was always success in music. I
Right.
learned from my mother to not overindulge. I was the least indulgent guy in the band. But once all of this crashed and burned, I started to self medicate and try to kill the pain. And next thing I know, I became physically addicted to, one of the most addicting substances on earth, and wound up in that really dark cycle and pattern for about 7 years, and lost everything over it.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because as I'm reading it, you know, and usually when you hear these stories, there does need to be the rock bottom moment for the
Oh,
person.
yeah.
Everyone encouraging you, it's not going to matter. You have to want to do it. And the fact that your rock bottom wasn't, you know, going to meetings and basically only going to meetings just so you could meet up with your heroin guy in the parking lot, and then you would, you know,
Yeah.
go smoke in your truck. And it's more like you talked about losing everything. It was your, you know, eventual ex-wife, and I guess it was one of your bandmates. They put all of your belongings into a storage locker, and basically your life was reduced to a key, right? That was the
Yep.
moment where you were like, yeah,
Yep. That was pretty much the wake up moment, that I had played every card in the deck. Um,
yeah,
and that's kind of what has to happen for most people, is they have no more good options, no more little back doors, no more little scams. Um, and you got to go through a lot of pain, and that's just what has to happen, and that's what happened. And lo and behold, it became the turning point of my life. So
yeah. And so obviously, you know, you're able to get yourself into recovery, and you know, then you have your, you know, then you're able to reconnect with someone from earlier in your life who's your current wife. So talk about sort of having that person arrive back into your life at the right moment when you were ready to have somebody back in your life.
yeah, well, back in the whole heyday of the music business, Geffen had hired, and Jimmy Iovine had hired an outside publicist, this woman Renee, um, who I worked with closely via the phone while we were out on tour with Kiss, and we became friends. And we stayed in contact for years. And then, when everything had crashed and burned and resurrected in my life, it wound up being that she wound up becoming single when I was single. And so we started, we always had feelings for each other that we, never really explored. And then we did. And, lo and behold, this very long term friendship blossomed into this great romance. And we're together to this day, and we're partners. And she knows all my secrets and all my dirt and all my history, and loves me for it anyway. And so it's a good thing.
And I thought it was telling of how well she knew you, because you know, you didn't say, "Hey, I was thinking of trying to do music again." She kind of knew what an important part of your life it had been, so she really encouraged you to eventually, you know, starting to get back out there and doing Little Caesar, but just the idea of exploring music. So talk about what that's meant for your life, and the fact that Little Caesar now currently does go out, and you know, you mentioned you're going to be heading out on the road with Junkyard. So talk about putting the band back together literally and
Yeah.
and just having it be sort of an added layer to a much fuller life than it was when your life kind of revolved around having the band Little Caesar.
Yeah, well, when everything crashed and burned in like '94 or '92, it was, the band all went our separate ways. We all loved each other still and stayed close. We were family. And then back in around 2010, 2011, we decided to get together and just have fun and play songs. And the next thing you know, we were like, you know, we have some song ideas and this is a lot of fun. We'd all healed from our wounds that healed from the corporate approach to making music. And we decided to make a pact to each other that we would do this not as a journey of the wallet, but one of the spirit. And we've been doing it ever since now. It's like 10, 12 years. And we've done, we tour Europe once, twice a year. We go out and do weekend runs around the US. And it's purely for the music. It's not for money. It's not for fame. It's nothing but making music, making the music that we love with guys that we love for people that we love. And it keeps it all honest and fresh and simple and rooted in the most important factor.
Right, absolutely. So I think that the fact that if you weren't doing it, your life wouldn't necessarily have a gaping hole in it, but then it is there sort of to complement what is already going on. And I'm glad to hear that you're still active because, as discussed earlier, I missed the band 33 years ago. So hopefully I still get a chance to see you guys somewhere down the road and finally get to see Little Caesar. The one final thing that I wanted to talk to you, and again, we've been talking for almost an hour with Ron Young, who's been very generous with his time. The new book, Judge This Book by Its Cover, is a great book. As I told him at the beginning of our conversation, I thought I was only going to read a little of it, and I literally couldn't put it down. So please check it out. During the band's ascent, there was kind of a very interesting group of champions that you had. And by the way, before I get into that, Dominicus Saxon in the chat says that I could listen to Ron's stories for another hour easy. So obviously, if you read the book, there's plenty of stories that I wanted to tell, but you'll have to get to the book to get all of them. I just take a moment to talk about what it meant to the band, the support that maybe added to a reputation you didn't want to have, but there was this really strong support by the Hells Angels, wasn't there?
Hells Angels and a lot of other motorcycle clubs too.
Sure,
we wound up getting affiliated just by doing some shows for the Hells Angels and then kind of pulling us under their wing, so to speak. And it's sort of like picking up a little puppy. They really can't wiggle away. You just kind of got to sit there. But yeah, we just, being real motorcycle riders and motorcycle builders back in the period of the hair metal days, there weren't a lot of blue collar, down to earth, motorcycle riding type bands. And so when we came out, we immediately became affiliated with the motorcycle community. Easy Rider magazine and Iron Horse and all these magazines were doing articles on us. And the next thing you know, that's attracting a whole lot of motorcycle clubs around the country. And there were some shows that there was tension in the parking lot, so to speak, between rival motorcycle clubs to the point where the cops had to come out, a few nights showing up with like riot gear on. And we're like, we're just trying to play a rock show. We didn't think this was going to turn into some kind of power struggle between motorcycle clubs in the area. And that kind of followed us. And it actually got me into trouble because we were doing a bunch of, we wound up, becoming affiliated, a little bit more deeply by doing shows and such, to the point where the FBI opened up a file on me. And they were tapping my phone, I found out, for a couple of years. And then when they realized that we had nothing to do with any illicit activities, it was purely a friendship and a camaraderie and a personal stuff that developed between us and some of the higher ups of some of the chapters. And so it was interesting because it sort of followed us and got us into a bit of trouble for a while.
Yeah, definitely. And that was a real standout through line from the history of the band. And also, I thought it was there's a great explanation of the scene that you're in Terminator 2, because you were friends with James Cameron at the time, and I think you do a great job detailing that in the in the book. But how often do people be like, just whether they come up to you or if it's people just like, hey, I was watching T2 again and I forgot you're in there.
All the time.
Yeah.
I get people grab screenshots and send it to me. This just came up on my cable channel,
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun and a sort of oddball, off the wall kind of thing that just happened in my life because of the friends that I had at the time. One of being Catherine Bigelow, who winds up marrying Jim Cameron, and then Jim Cameron sticks me in this movie. And it was who knew that it would become one of the most iconic scenes of the film? So just really a fun thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're describing it, I'm like, I haven't seen T2 in years, but I'm like, oh my God, I know exactly what he's talking about. It is a very iconic moment, and to be a part of that is great. But again, you get to still go out there and make music. For people that want to check in on the band, what are the websites and the socials? I realize that that's not in my notes, and I don't want to give out the wrong information. So how do people keep tabs on whether Little Caesar will be heading to their town?
Yes, do a search on Facebook, and the second one down, the first one's going to be the pizza company.
Yeah.
And then the second one down will be the band. You can follow us on Facebook, please. And or littlecaesar.net. We never update our website though. It's always on through Facebook and Instagram as well. But yeah, please follow us on Facebook.
Yeah, again, to sort of point out the ineptitude of record company people, at that point, Little Caesars wasn't the national chain that it is today. It wasn't up there with Domino's and Pizza Hut.
And it wasn't even in California, so we never even heard of it. So,
but people at the record company knew about it, but they just assumed you knew it. Yeah, they didn't think to mention, hey, again, should you be going out on the road with your band called Papa John? Is that necessarily a good idea? So there's so many of those moments where you're just like record company people, and it's the idea of Suits, the fact that like network and movie theater executives can roll, renovations to their office into a movie budget and, things like that. We're talking about all the different pies getting carved up earlier. Anyway, Ron Young, it was wonderful to read the book and delightful to get a chance to meet you. And I do hope to be able to catch the band somewhere down the road. Judge this book by its cover. Ron Young, thank you so much again for being so generous with your time, and hopefully see you out on the road. That's all the time we have.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
We'll see you all next time on the Bladtcast.